$14,200,000 is missing, Fallon, and your name appears on every single transfer. Hudson Crane, 41-year-old vice president of corporate acquisitions at Meridian Halstead Properties and husband of Fallon, dropped a bound evidence packet onto the dining room table with both hands. The pages fanned open. Fallon Rue Crane, 34-year-old coordinator of the Ashwood Community Housing Initiative and wife of Hudson, stood at the far end of that same table beneath a chandelier turned up too bright. Her usual chair had been replaced by a hard-backed seat set apart from the family, positioned beneath that light the way a witness stand is positioned in a courtroom. Tamsin Vole, 32-year-old associate director of corporate strategy at Meridian Halstead and mistress of Hudson, occupied the chair that had once belonged to Fallon. She sat beside him without apology. A glass of champagne rested at her elbow. The food on the table had not been touched. It had been arranged to make the room look like a family gathering. It was not one. Every person in that room except Fallon had already agreed on how the evening would end. Inside the packet were altered bank statements, fabricated wire confirmations, a shell company registration carrying the name Ashwood Capital Ventures, and a signature lifted from a grant application. Fallon had filed 2 years earlier. Hudson told the assembled guests that his wife had created a fraudulent vendor designed to mirror her own non-profit and used it to siphon construction funds from Meridian Halstead's escrow account. Rowena Crane, 66-year-old mother of Hudson and openly hostile mother-in-law of Fallon, looked at the documents and then at Fallon with an expression settled long before the evening began. "You came into this family with nothing," she said. "I always assumed you had a reason for that." Fallon looked at Hudson directly. "You know those transfers did not come from me." Hudson looked at the wall. Then Corwin Lane, 58-year-old attorney for the Crane family, placed a second document beside the first. It was a divorce petition already bearing Hudson's signature. Behind it came an acknowledgement of service, a written consent form, and a proposed settlement requiring Fallon to forfeit the marital property, waive all financial claims, agree to a non-disclosure clause, and accept personal responsibility for the missing funds. Fallon read every page slowly. She picked up the pen. She signed the acknowledgement of service, confirming she had received the divorce petition. She signed the written consent, confirming she agreed the marriage should end. Then she pushed the settlement back across the table, unsigned. "I will agree that this marriage is over," she said. "I will not sign a confession to a crime I did not commit." Hudson mistook her steadiness for surrender. Moments later, Randall Good, 47-year-old head of household security for the Crane estate, was instructed to retrieve Fallon's handbag from the coatroom where Rowena had insisted it be left upon entry. He carried it to the table. Rowena emptied it herself. Keys, a phone, a foundation badge, a folded hardware store receipt, and then rolling to a stop against a water glass, a black flash drive stamped with a Meridian Halstead asset tag. Tamsin spoke before anyone asked. "That's the one containing the escrow records." Fallon turned toward her. "No one has opened it. How would you know what's on it?" Tamsin's composure held for a moment. Then she said it was company equipment, and she recognized the serial number. Beside her, Emmett Crane, 28-year-old communications coordinator at Meridian Halstead and younger brother of Hudson, stared at the drive. He had seen Tamsin carrying an identical one 3 weeks earlier. When she entered a records room she had no reason to visit, he did not speak. Rowena's hand found his wrist beneath the table. The dining room doors opened before Fallon could say anything further. Detective Remy Tate, 44-year-old financial crimes investigator assigned to the case against Fallon, entered alongside 2 uniformed officers. She carried a warrant issued 6 days earlier. Hudson had submitted his fabricated evidence package to law enforcement nearly a week before arranging the dinner. He had invited Fallon to a family gathering after he already knew her arrest was coming. What Hudson did not know was that Fallon Rue Crane was also Fallon Rue Ashton, the sole living heir to the Ashton Legacy Trust, which held a controlling 74% stake in Halcyon Development Partners, a private real estate holding company valued at $1.7 billion that currently owned the ground leases, construction, financing facilities for 3 of Meridian Halstead's most important active projects. He believed he was framing a housing non-profit coordinate with a modest salary. He had been wrong about nearly everything. Officers approached. Stafford Ames, 51-year-old financial crimes attorney and longtime legal advisor to the Ashton Family Trust, entered after identifying himself as counsel. Fallon looked at him once. "Contact Dara and the independent committee," she said. "Preserve every Meridian Halstead account record, every access log, and every authorization token from the past 90 days. I am recused from all decisions. Independent review only." Hudson smiled at Tamsin as the officers moved toward Fallon. He had no idea who was waiting at the other end of what he had just started. Some betrayals do not break quiet people immediately. They give the truth enough time to collect witnesses, stay until the end to find out what happened to those accounts, and why the woman Hudson decided to sacrifice turned out to be the one person he could least afford to lose. The morning Meridian Halstead's construction financing stock processing had started like most Tuesdays for Fallon. She was at the Ashwood Community Housing Initiative office, reviewing utility access forms for a cluster of renovated row houses in the Garland district when her phone rang. Hudson did not say hello. The Halcyon disbursement system is rejecting our draw requests. You understand real estate finance better than anyone on my staff. I need you here in 20 minutes. Behind Fallon, 12 families were waiting to sign paperwork for assisted housing applications. Several had driven more than an hour. How many active projects are affected? She asked. All 3. Construction payroll runs Friday. She asked her deputy to walk every family through the process personally. Then she drove to Meridian Halstead's offices and sat down with the financing reports Hudson had been unable to reconcile. Within 30 minutes, she found 4 serious problems. Revenue from pre-sales had been counted as confirmed income before contracts were executed. 2 construction loans reflected lower outstanding balances than actual draws indicated. A pair of vendor accounts, listed under the names Westgate Consulting and Ashwood Capital Ventures, appeared in the disbursement records without corresponding approved contracts. The Ashwood name made her pause. It was close enough to her foundation's name to be intentional, if someone wanted it found later. She raised the discrepancy with Orrin Slade, 50-year-old chief financial officer at Meridian Halstead, and one of Hudson's most trusted senior staff. He laughed without warmth and said she was confusing project accounting with grocery budget bookkeeping. Fallon did not argue. She pointed to the line items and asked who had approved them. The room went quiet. Hudson ended the meeting. He told staff to leave. Then he pushed the full vendor file toward Fallon and told her to fix it before Halcyon's compliance team started asking questions. 2 hours later, Fallon submitted a corrected draw request through Meridian Halstead's financing portal. The disbursement cleared before 4 in the afternoon, construction payroll processed on time. The workers were paid. Hudson stood before his project team the following morning and told them his quick identification of the financing error had saved the payroll cycle. None of the people who had been in that room corrected him. Fallon heard about it from Emmett, who had watched the whole meeting from the hallway and said nothing, because at the time he did not yet know what that silence was going to cost someone. That same week, Dara Kessel, 57-year-old chief compliance officer at Halcyon Development Partners and a colleague of Fallon's late father Alistair, sent Fallon an encrypted alert through the trust's governance system. The Ashwood Capital Ventures account had triggered a fraud flag. It had been opened using a copy of Fallon's state-issued identification, her old nonprofit's tax number, and a bank signature card from a checking account she had closed 4 years earlier. Those documents had been stored in a file that Meridian Halstead's legal office had requested from Fallon and Hudson's marital records. Hudson had told Fallon the company attorney needed her identification for a lease co-signature update. She had trusted him. Dara explained that Halcyon's independent committee could authorize a formal fraud review if Fallon chose to request one. Fallon asked her to begin immediately. Then she formally recused herself from every operational decision affecting Meridian Halstead's accounts from that moment forward. The committee would proceed without her input. The night Fallon found Hudson with Tamsin, she had not been looking for them. She had returned to Meridian Halstead's offices after a foundation board meeting to retrieve a sealed letter from her bag. The letter had taken 3 weeks to write. Their 9th wedding anniversary was 2 weeks away, and the final disclosure restriction on the Ashton Legacy Trust had expired 10 days earlier. She had planned to tell Hudson everything on that anniversary: her full legal name, her father's company, the trust, the identity she had been protecting since she was 14. Over dinner privately, as a beginning rather than a confession. The hallway outside his corner office was dark. The outer door stood open. Voices came from the interior room. She stepped closer. Hudson and Tamsin stood near his desk. He was holding her. She was wearing a bracelet that had appeared on his personal credit card statement 6 weeks earlier. On the desk behind them, spread across a leather portfolio, were photocopies of Fallon's driver's license, her old checking account signature card, and a printed shell company formation document. A flash drive with a Meridian Halstead asset tag sat beside the stack. The folder beneath it read, Ashwood Capital, Diamantation Set. Fallon did not move for a long moment. Then she photographed the desk through the glass panel beside the doorway, before either of them saw her reflection. Hudson noticed her before she could leave. He stepped away from Tamsin, but did not lower his voice. "This has been over for a long time. You just didn't want to see it." Tamsin straightened her jacket. "Being his wife never made you his equal." Fallon reached toward the folder on the desk. Hudson covered it with his hand. "You have no authority here." She thought for one moment about telling him who she was. She thought about watching him understand that the woman he was framing controlled the financing for his 3 flagship projects. Then she thought about what Stafford had warned her. If Hudson learned about Halcyon before the forensic record was complete, he might destroy evidence before the committee could preserve it. She walked out without giving him anything he had not already taken. She met Stafford that night. He told her to preserve every message, change her foundation access codes, stop responding directly to the Crane family, and route all further communication through his office. He also told her that the dinner Rowena had been organizing was not a family gathering. He had confirmed who else was on the invitation list: Meridian Halstead's general counsel, 2 board members, and Corwin Lane. "That dinner is a proceeding," Stafford said, with an audience. Fallon returned to the marital home only to collect documents and her father's watch. While she was there, Tamsin arrived using her own key and carrying an overnight bag. She moved through the house with the familiarity of someone who had been rehearsing. She set her things on the bathroom counter. She opened the closet. And then Fallon saw it. Her mother's ring, a simple platinum band with a single inset stone that her father had given her mother on the day they married, which Fallon had kept in a box on the bedroom dresser, was on Tamsin's right hand. "Take that off." Tamsin looked at it. "Hudson gave it to me. He said it was just an old piece." "It was my mother's." Tamsin removed it and set it on the dresser without ceremony. Hudson appeared in the doorway. "Come to the dinner," he said. "Cooperate, and this stays out of the courts." Fallon picked up the ring and left. In the days before the dinner, Dara's team at Halcyon worked quietly. Preserved access logs showed that the Ashwood Capital Ventures account had been created from a device registered to Meridian Halstead's corporate network. The formation documents had been submitted using a cloned version of Fallon's old digital signature. A second fraudulent vendor, Westgate Consulting, had funded hotel stays and private car services on dates that matched Hudson and Tamsin's travel calendar. Orrin Slade's bank records showed 3 deposits from Westgate Consulting that matched the dates of his overdue personal loan payments to the dollar. Fallon knew none of this when she walked into the Crane family home that evening. She had gone because Emmett had sent her a text 2 hours before the dinner. He said he had seen Tamsin carrying the evidence folder into a file room that held personnel records. He said the dinner had been planned for weeks. Stafford told Fallon she was not required to attend. He told her that if she did, he would remain outside and enter the moment she called. Before going in, she photographed every item inside her handbag, sent Stafford the timestamp, and noted the time when Rowena insisted the bag be left in the coat room at entry. She knew it might not come back the same way she left it. The rest of that evening moved the way it had been designed to, the evidence packet. Rowena's verdict reached before Fallon arrived. Corwin's quiet arrangement of documents at the right moments, the divorce petition, the proposed settlement demanding her silence, her property, and a signature on a theft she had not committed. And then the flash drive that fell from her bag, which Tamsin named before anyone asked to open it. When Detective Tate arrived with the warrant, Fallon answered every instruction without raising her voice. Stafford entered seconds after identifying himself as counsel. He asked these officers to preserve the drive's chain of custody, photograph the table as it currently stood, and document the exact timeline of the handbag from the moment it was taken from Fallon at the door. Hudson watched the officers approach Fallon and reached for Tamsin's hand. That gesture cost him more than he understood in that moment. The holding facility was cold and the bench was narrow, and the television mounted near the ceiling was showing the Crane family's prepared statement. Fallon's name appeared beneath a photograph the family had provided. The report described her as a non-profit administrator who had abused her position as a corporate spouse. It did not mention that Hudson had filed his criminal complaint 6 days before inviting her to dinner. It did not mention the second vendor account. It did not mention that a transfer of $3.1 million had been processed from a Meridian Halstead account 4 hours after Fallon was taken into custody, at a time when she was sitting in this room, not in front of a computer. Dottie Marsh, 52-year-old detention specialist assigned to the holding area, turned the volume down without being asked. She had been watching Fallon for most of the hour. "You don't have to keep watching that," Dottie said. Fallon looked at the dark screen. "They're not reporting what happened. They're reporting what they were given." The following morning, Stafford arrived with the forensic timeline Dara's team had completed overnight. The $3.1 million transfer had originated from a device logged into Hudson's private office. The authorization token used to approve it was Hudson's personally. Security entry records showed him walking into that office during the dinner. During the 3 minutes he excused himself for what he described as an urgent bank call. The transfer had completed within that window. Fallon had been seated at the table the entire time, visible to the family, the board members, and Corwin Lane. Emmett sent Stafford a second message the morning after the arrest. He had not slept. He had been thinking about the flash drive, about Tamsin's matching one, about where he had seen her carrying it. He sent Stafford 7 photographs from his phone, a partial video, and a screenshot of an internal Meridian Halstead communications file showing that Hudson had instructed the company's media team to draft a public theft statement 4 days before the family dinner. The statement had been finalized before the flash drive was discovered. Stafford forwarded everything to Detective Tate through proper legal channels. Coralie Van, 43-year-old senior program director at the Ashwood Community Housing Initiative and one of Fallon's closest colleagues, refused to stop working when the story broke. While 2 foundation board members went quiet and several donors paused, Coralie drove to Stafford's office with a folder of grant records and one pointed piece of documentation. 2 years earlier, Meridian Halstead had offered the Ashwood Initiative a $600,000 corporate donation. Fallon had returned it. She had written a 2-page letter explaining that accepting funds from a company where her husband held a senior position would compromise the foundation's independence and undermine the communities it served. The letter directly contradicted Hudson's claim that Fallon had been desperate for company money. Fallon was released on conditional bond secured through the Ashton Legacy Trust. No official was pressured. No exception was requested. Stafford followed procedure at every step. She surrendered her travel documents, agreed to all reporting requirements, and avoided direct contact with Meridian Halstead staff. She did not return to the marital home. Hudson had already sent her belongings in boxes. She found them stacked outside the property that the trust maintained for family use. The boxes had been packed carelessly. A framed photograph from her parents' anniversary had broken in transit. Her mother's letters were crumpled between shoes. The anniversary gift she had bought for Hudson was still wrapped, forgotten in a side pocket of a travel bag. She sat on the floor of the empty property and held the broken photograph for a while. In it, her father stood outside a building under construction, with his arm around her 14-year-old shoulders. Alistair Ashton had never wanted to raise a daughter who thought of wealth as armor. He wanted to raise one who understood what it cost other people when it was misused. He had taken her through tenant complaint files, small business loan applications, lease disputes, community hardship cases. During her first construction financing review at 16, she had treated the figures like a school exercise. He placed a photograph of a family outside a rental unit beside the spreadsheet. "Every line belongs to somebody's life," he told her. "When the numbers are dishonest, ordinary people pay first." That lesson was why Fallon had left the 12 families at the housing office to drive to Hudson's company the morning the payroll was failing. It was also connected to the truth Hudson did not know. Publicly, she was Fallon Rue, a quiet non-profit coordinator his family considered financially insignificant. Privately, she was Fallon Rue Ashton, controlling beneficiary of the Ashton Legacy Trust. That trust held 74% of Halcyon Development Partners, the institution holding the ground leases, the construction loans, and the revolving credit for all 3 of Hudson's active projects. He had signed their premarital agreement without reading the sealed trust disclosure attached to it. He assumed it contained modest family property. Fallon had not corrected him because the trust's legal restrictions required her identity to remain sealed, and because she had carried one private fear longer than any legal requirement. She wanted to know whether someone could love Fallon Rue before learning what Fallon Rue Ashton owned. 8 years earlier, Hudson had seemed to be that person. He had helped her carry projection equipment after a housing symposium and eaten a vending machine dinner with her in a conference hall, instead of attending the networking reception. When she told him she had a protected family trust, he said he did not care what was in it. She had believed him. She had had reason to for a while. Then ambition changed the distance between them. Then Tamsin joined Meridian Halstead. Then every question Fallon asked became a complaint, and every piece of work she completed quietly became a story. Hudson told in boardrooms with himself at the center. She had kept waiting for the version of him that no longer existed. When Weston Prohl, 47-year-old independent forensic accountant retained by Halcyon's compliance committee, completed his analysis 3 weeks after Fallon's release, the record was clear and complete. Every document used to implicate Fallon contained a traceable origin. The first vendor registration had been submitted through a device assigned to Tamsin. The email account connected to Ashwood Capital Ventures had been created from Meridian Halsted's executive floor. Fallon's identification had been copied from documents Hudson had requested from their marital files. The flash drive in her bag was from a company security order signed out in Tamsin's name. The missing funds had gone to hotel stays during Hudson and Tamsin's travel periods. A portion had funded the deposit on a property Hudson was quietly negotiating through a personal holding company. Orrin Slade had received payments from the false vendors that matched his outstanding personal loan balances. The authorization token used for the $3.1 million transfer while Fallon sat at the family dinner table was Hudson's. Building entry records showed him in his private office during the exact 3-minute window. The transfer completed within that window. Lennox Frey, 49-year-old senior prosecutor assigned to re-examine the case, reviewed the materials and said what the record made obvious. The evidence used to establish the original warrant had been deliberately manufactured to lead to one person. Charges against Fallon were dismissed by order of the court. By the following Friday, Halcyon's independent committee had voted to remove Hudson, Tamsin, and Orrin from authorization access on all associated accounts, place Meridian Halsted's credit facility into material default review, suspend new borrowing, and require independent financial supervision of daily operations. Employee payroll on the 3 active construction projects was separated into a monitored disbursement account and protected in full. The restrictions did not end Meridian Halsted. They made Hudson's continued presence inside it impossible. The Halcyon boardroom held more people than Fallon had expected. Hudson sat at the conference table with Corwin, Rowena, and 2 Meridian Halsted board members. He had told Corwin that Halcyon's chairman would listen to reason once someone of standing made the case in person. He placed his company security token beside his notepad and waited. Cedric Alloway, 69-year-old chairman of Halcyon Development Partners and former business partner of Alistair Ashton, had known Fallon since she was a child, learning to read a balance sheet at her father's side. He took his seat at the head of the table without acknowledging Hudson's pointed look toward the door. Fallon entered beside Stafford and Dara. She wore her father's watch and a grey suit she had pressed herself. She sat down across from Hudson. For 3 full seconds, he appeared to be looking at someone who had no reason to be in that room. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Fallon Rue Ashton, Cedric said, controlling beneficiary of the Ashton Legacy Trust and principal owner of Halcyon Development Partners. Rowena laughed once, a short sound with no warmth in it. This is something she arranged. Hudson did not laugh. He was doing arithmetic, and the numbers kept arriving at the same answer. The ground lease on his flagship project. Halcyon owned it. The construction loan facility on all 3 active developments. Halcyon held it. The revolving credit line Meridian Halsted drew against every quarter. Halcyon extended it. The institution he had needed to impress, whose compliance officers he had hoped to manage, whose trust he assumed his family name would protect. It had been operating under the controlling interest of the woman whose chair he had removed from the dinner table. "You lied to me," he said. Fallon sat with her hands open on the table. "Before we married, I told you I had a protected family trust. You signed the disclosure agreement without reading it. I never told you a direct untruth. I didn't correct your assumptions about what the trust contained because legal restrictions were still active, and because I wanted to know whether someone could love Fallon before they knew what Fallon Ashton owned." She paused. "You were that person once. You allowed me to believe you had nothing. You chose to believe that because it made you feel larger. You stopped asking questions about me the moment I stopped being useful to your career." Hudson looked toward the window. "You could have ended this investigation. You controlled the financing. I recused myself from every decision the moment I knew the accounts were compromised. The restrictions you are sitting here to challenge were approved by independent directors, authorized by outside counsel, and ordered by a court." She looked at Cedric briefly, then back at Hudson. "I also asked this committee to protect construction payroll and essential vendor payments on all 3 of your active projects. Your workers should not lose their income because of what you did." Hudson had no answer for that. Weston projected the forensic record onto the boardroom screen. It took 40 minutes to walk through every false vendor, every copied document, every transfer, and where the money had actually gone. Hudson's token, Tamsin's workstation, Oren's deposits. The dinner arranged after the criminal complaint, the prepared public statement written before the flash drive was found, the drive signed out in Tamsin's name. When the projection ended, Tamsin looked at Hudson across the table. "You told me the records would never trace back to us." Hudson did not answer. Detective Tate entered with Lennox and 2 investigators. Evidence preservation orders for Oren's laptop, Hudson's devices, Tamsin's access credentials. The investigation Hudson had designed to end at Fallon had turned around and was finishing at him. Tamsin came to Stafford's office 2 days later with her attorney and a folder of printed messages. Messages from Hudson directing her to open the vendor accounts, handle Fallon's identification documents, prepare the evidence packet, carry the flash drive, enter the coat room. She gave them to the prosecutor's office in exchange for cooperation consideration. Her exposure remained real and substantial regardless of the exchange. What she had done to Fallon had not become less serious because Hudson had intended to blame her next. Emmett submitted his evidence through Stafford and cooperated fully with the investigation. He came to Stafford's office and sat across from Fallon and said that he had watched his brother arrange a woman's arrest and stayed silent at the table, and he had no defense for that. He did not ask for quick forgiveness. He said he should have spoken before the officers put restraints on her wrists. Fallon told him the truth was more valuable late than never. She also told him that courage arriving after someone else paid the price for your silence was not the same as courage at all. He accepted the boundary without arguing. Rowena came on a separate afternoon and asked to speak with Fallon. Her voice was careful in a way it had never been before. She said that if she had known Fallon was Alistair Ashton's daughter, she would have treated her differently from the beginning. Fallon let a moment pass. The woman you treated the way you did deserved fairness before you knew who her father was. She did not raise her voice. She simply said it. Rowena did not respond. Hudson's removal from Meridian Halstead was completed by the company's independent board within 2 weeks of the boardroom meeting. He lost access to every project authorization and credit facility. The property he had been acquiring through a personal holding company was subject to civil asset review. Tamsin lost her position and the future she had believed she was building alongside him. Oren Slade admitted to manipulating Meridian Halstead's financial reports and accepted the consequences that followed. His professional certification was suspended. The criminal charges against Hudson were filed on a Tuesday. On the same day, Halcyon's independent committee finalized a restructuring plan with Meridian Halstead's remaining board that protected employee payroll, preserved legitimate supplier contracts, and continued support for all 3 active construction projects under independent financial supervision. The workers stayed employed. The honest parts of the company were allowed to continue. Fallon had asked Cedric to protect them before she asked for anything else. The final divorce order arrived on a Friday morning. Stafford set it on the desk in Fallon's new office, inside Halcyon's headquarters, where she had accepted a non-executive governance role focused on tenant protection, small business financing's access, and community investment oversight. She would not direct operations. She would not replace the independent committee. Her ownership carried responsibility, not the authority to make every decision her own. She signed the receipt confirming she had received the order. The pen felt different in her hand than it had at the dinner table. At the dinner, her signature had been used to try to close every door. Here it was opening one. Outside Halcyon's front entrance, a few journalists waited with questions. Fallon stepped through the doors wearing her father's watch and nothing that announced wealth. This was the first time she had entered the building publicly as Fallon Rue Ashton. She kept Rue because it was her mother's name, and her mother had once thrown herself between Fallon and a man who wanted her only for what she was going to inherit. She carried Ashton, now without the fear that had traveled with it for 20 years. The thing that had made her a target when she was 14 years old was no longer something she needed to hide. At the Ashwood Community Housing Initiative, Coralie had been preparing the paperwork for a new program, legal support services for individuals falsely implicated through document fraud, and emergency recovery grants for families harmed by corporate financial misconduct. Fallon signed the program charter at a small ceremony inside the foundation's main room. The same signature Hudson had copied and weaponized now established the Ashton Rue Legal Recovery Fund. She had not won because she was powerful. She had won because she was patient and because the truth had nowhere left to go except exactly where it had always been headed. Back at Halcyon, a new case file waited on her desk beside Alistair's watch. The cover read, "Urgent. Construction worker misidentified as embezzlement suspect. Employer's payroll account records appear to have been altered." Fallon set down her coffee and opened the first page. Her marriage had ended, her hiding had ended, but the truth had already found the next person who needed someone patient enough to wait for it.